strength. We must produce strength. To produce strength, we must sacrifice.
Sony has always wanted Killzone to be a thing. The PlayStation-exclusive shooter franchise from Sony-owned Guerrilla Games began back on PlayStation 2, touched PlayStation 3 a couple of times, and even saw entries on PSP and Vita, but it's never quite taken off. But now that Killzone is the marquee launch exclusive for PlayStation 4, gamers are going to take notice. And they'll be happy they did. Shadowfall brings the stagnant franchise in a fresher and far more exciting direction. Its smooth gameplay, exciting multiplayer, gorgeous graphics, and open-ended approach to level design make Shadowfall the strongest game in the core series to date. Shadowfall's plot attempts to take the series away from a straightforward, war-torn scenario, and puts it into something more nuanced. Without spoiling too much, let's just say that Killzone 3, released in 2011 on PS3, ended with a bang. Those events changed the relationship between the Vectans and the Helghast permanently, forcing them into a sort of Cold War scenario where they both live on the same planet, one split in half by a massive wall that circles the entire circumference of Vecta. But decades later, old, nasty feelings persist, and the Helghast and Vectans live a sort of uneasy peace. The Shadow Marshals, the ISA's version of Black Ops, are often at the center of conflicts between the two sides, and that's where your character Lucas Kellen comes into play. The story itself is a little underdeveloped, and even a bit silly at times, especially with some uneven voice acting.
Lucas, when I look out there, I see our enemies testing us, seeing if we have the resolve.
If you send me back in, I will find him, I promise.
But the theme is awesome and novel for the franchise. Of course, everything's helped out considerably by Shadowfall's stunningly beautiful graphics. It tends to run well, and its color palette in particular is exceptionally vivid for a Killzone game. Long gone are the days of drab grays, blacks, and browns. What's immediately apparent when you start playing Shadowfall is that it feels lighter than previous Killzones. Your character is no longer encumbered by considerable arbitrary weight, and movement is inherently faster and snappier as a result. This makes Shadowfall's occasional emphasis on stealth in particular all the more powerful, although slinking around behind enemies for brutal melee kills isn't always as responsive as it could be, resulting in a half-assed smack of the rifle instead of a knife attack you wanted. Likewise, your enemies are no longer stoic bullet sponges. Shadowfall has taken a page out of the books of more popular mainstream shooters. Think Call of Duty or Halo. And while that might sound like a removal of what makes the Killzone series feel distinct, rest assured it works out wonderfully in the end. Unfortunately, the Helghast are sometimes easier to fell because the AI isn't always up to snuff, and not because they simply tend to take less damage. You'll occasionally encounter enemies that don't quite turn on when you approach, shoot into walls, and don't practice much by way of self-preservation. What I love most about Shadowfall's single-player component is its non-linear mission structure. No, the game doesn't take place on a wide-open map, but missions do allow you to do certain things in any order you want. It gives a feeling of ownership over how missions play out. Do you disable the security system before attacking so that reinforcements aren't called in? Do you sneak around and stab people or come in guns blazing? Do you use secret passages to cut through parts of the map or go through the front door? Choice is always good, and while it's not nearly to the degree you'll find in other games like Deus Ex, Killzone is no longer simply a 10-hour corridor shooter either. Instead, it's a 10-hour-long shooter with a wide variety of environments to explore and situations to work your way through, often in ways you deem fit. Your robotic friend Owl is also a nice addition. Using DualShock 4's touchpad, you can select one of 4 main abilities to help you in the heat of battle. Using Owl wisely to shock and outright attack foes takes some of the heat off of you, and will mean the difference between life and death in some scenarios. Owl can also be used to grapple to various locations, giving Shadowfall a vertical feel, and can even deploy a very Resistance Fall of Man-like protective shield. However, Owl is used most for hacking computers in order to continue the story, and it does get a little tiring manipulating the same computer console with the same Owl skill time and time again. If there's an aspect of the game that gave me the most grief though, it's the totally bizarre, clumsy, and ill-designed platforming and zero-gravity sections. There are a couple of spots in particular, especially later in the campaign, that are completely obnoxious because they stray so far from what makes Shadowfall so fun. Guerrilla would have been wise to cut some of those weaker elements out and focus more on smart AI and consistent melee mechanics instead. Since Killzone 2, the core Killzone experience for the biggest fans of the franchise has always been its multiplayer component, and I'm pleased to report that Shadowfall is a blast to play online. Naturally, the core of online, Warzones, returns in Shadowfall. Warzones are basically ever-roving game modes that keep parties together as they play one after another in sequence. Playing through preset or custom Warzones is incredibly fun, as is playing through individual modes in a one-off capacity. These affect your online rankings, but the lack of an experience system means less risk of feeling overwhelmed by those who have put more time into playing and are not only better at it than you, but also better equipped. With 3 unique character classes and a ton of loadout options, and with all weapons and skills unlocked from the get-go, Shadowfall multiplayer is much more about acclimation and skill than anything else. Guerrilla's classic Warzone scenarios provide plenty of fodder, but making your own is also really fun. During a single online session, we played through with only 1 life to live, a sniper rifle, and a knife, and nothing else. Then we played a mission with only pistols and slowly regenerating health. Players are going to find plenty to tinker with in this regard, and Guerrilla may take notice if you make a popular Warzone that other players take to. With 10 maps and a bunch of modes, such as Capture and Hold, Search and Destroy, and more, Shadowfall is going to keep the online community very busy for a long time. And with a ton of free DLC support promised in the future, including new maps, things are only going to get better. Killzone Shadowfall is a great launch game for PlayStation 4, one that provides a solid single-player experience and a really fun and engaging multiplayer environment to get lost in. Its problems, such as strange, frustrating non-shooter and platforming sections and occasionally wonky AI, are largely overshadowed by what Guerrilla Games has done right to make Killzone better. Killzone has been stagnant for a while, but Mercenary on Vita and now Shadowfall on PlayStation 4 represent a new, brighter era for the franchise. For more on all things Killzone and PlayStation 4, keep it tuned to IGN. And before we go, here's an extended look at Killzone Shadowfall's gorgeous second chapter.